What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of the Gen B podcast. So today we're going to get into tariffs. Just truth be told, before Trump started talking about tariffs this past weekend, if you haven't heard about it, I didn't know shit about tariffs until now. But we're going to get into it because truthfully, it affected Bitcoin's price, it affected the market's price, and that made us want to dive into what tariffs are. Because, like I said, at least I didn't have any idea what a tariff was before this because I'm an idiot. So, but before,
All I knew is we love tariffs. We have the best tariffs in the world.
huge
China's going to give us
tariffs.
exactly huge tariffs. William McKinley was the tariff king. Dude, he's been saying so much about tariffs. I saw a video yesterday where he was like, William McKinley loved tariffs, but I may even know more about tariffs than he did. And the video is from the Wall Street Journal, and they're like, yeah, McKinley was involved with tariffs for 30 years of his career and was actually a bit of an expert and knew exactly how to use them. Here comes Trump, the expert of modern day, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into everything there is to know about tariffs when it comes to at least beginner level, because I learned a lot about it just through a lot of research this past weekend. But before we get into it, let's just talk about Bitcoin's price. So as we're sitting here now, Bitcoin is at, I believe, around 97,000. So this is, we're talking right now, it's Wednesday evening. And when these tariffs over the weekend, so February 1st, I believe, maybe January 31st, Bitcoin opened up at, I believe it was $102,000 at the time. And then news started trickling out about these tariffs, and Bitcoin's price immediately just was going down. It got down to, I believe, 92, as low as 92. And then the next day, there was actually an announcement that these tariffs there was a pause put on them, and then price bounced back up. And so basically went from 102 down to 92, back up to 99, and now we're at 97, I believe. So that's just Bitcoin doing Bitcoin things. Maybe even following the market, maybe you haven't, but and Bitcoin's not the only thing that was affected. Obviously, the stock market itself was also affected. But maybe we just get into it now. You want to talk about exactly what tariffs are, how it can affect normal people like you and I, and just
Yeah,
get
maybe
into it.
some more color on what you're saying about this episode and the price. So we saw price do what it did. Not the first time Bitcoin's had such a crazy fluctuation, but I feel like we both felt like this was due to tariffs. We were talking about it over the weekend as it was going on. And the reason why tariffs would lead to a sell-off in all assets, not just Bitcoin, to your point, is just general uncertainty. Anytime there's uncertainty in markets related to assets, people sell off so that they can have cash, which is viewed as safer, because if a further drawdown is going to happen, a lot of people want to try to time the market and say, okay, well, if I think price is going to go down, maybe I can buy in cheaper. Or in the case of tariffs, who knows how far down it could go. That's not really something I adhere to, especially when it comes to Bitcoin. I'm definitely a buy and hold type of person where I'll buy at opportunities that I think are good opportunities. And some people even do dollar cost averaging, where they just buy over time regardless of what price is. And then I don't sell. I view this as the best money that someone can hold, the best savings technology. So even if it goes down and I bought at a higher price, I'm confident in the long run, and there's data to back this up, that price will go up as time goes on. So just to give some color there on why we thought price went down and just kind of how I'm approaching it. I think you're similar, and you're probably not selling during the great 2-day tariff scare or 1-day tariff scare.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that gets into Bitcoin knows or should know that there's going to be price volatility, whether that's warranted or not. And so you got to know what you're signing up for. So this was nothing, it goes down and okay. And it rebounds so quickly in large amounts that you really just get numb to it. And I haven't even been
Yeah.
in it that long, truthfully. I haven't experienced the drawdown of that some older, let's just call it OG Bitcoiners have, but
Yeah. No,
that's just
it's a
part of
good
it.
point. The volatility is there, and to the upside as well. Just to make one last point, where I don't have the data, this is something I'd even like to do a video on, is I think there's very specific days where like, or short periods of time where like price really pumps. So if you're out of the market, like let's say you sold off during this tariff scare and price, let's say, just shot up $30,000, you would have less Bitcoin at the end of it by trying to like time the market and game it out, because this thing can jump so quickly out of nowhere. So just keep that in mind. Like, really, no one's smart enough to time the market. It's a market for a reason. It's based on literally billions of people playing into this and making decisions. So anyway, we can get into tariffs and what they are now. Just, I think it's important to have that context behind the episode.
Yeah. And just to preface it, we're going to try to really just make this beginner level type stuff because, like I said, I knew absolutely nothing about tariffs before this announcement from Trump announcing tariffs. So we're going to try to
Yeah,
make this.
same here.
Yeah. So,
Cool.
you know, we'll get into it.
Yeah. So have my notes on the side of the screen here. So what are tariffs? A tariff is a tax that's imposed by a government on imported goods and services. So that's anything coming from a foreign country. In the case of Trump, we've heard about China, Mexico, Canada being these countries that he's applying these taxes to at the end of the day. We'll talk about what that looks like in practice. And then the purpose behind tariffs, in theory at least, is to protect local industries. It's a way to generate government revenue and a way to influence trade policy and deals that you have with foreign governments. So really a few different reasons why a government would enact tariffs. Okay. You have anything to add there?
No, I think
Okay. We'll
beginning.
dive into Trump and like the tariffs here. So like Evan said, on February 1st, Trump announced tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, which were set to kick off on February 4th. Today we're recording on February 5th. So yesterday is when they were supposed to go into effect. For Canada and Mexico, he was talking about a 25% tariff on most of their imported goods. I think there was some energy imports from Canada that they were doing 10% instead. And then China, there were already tariffs in place. I think those were from Trump's first presidency, but I think Biden may have as well. Not totally sure there. But they supplemented whatever those existing tariffs were with an additional 10 to 25% tax, depending on what the good is. The reason for these tariffs, or at least what the administration is saying, was they were putting these in place to have negotiations or like try to change behavior from these countries when it came to illegal immigration and the influx of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl. So really, again, just like using these as a bargaining chip to say, hey, we're not happy with what your countries are doing to try to stop behavior that we don't like. So we're taxing you and going to negatively affect your economy in order to like make a change in behavior. And I think over time, Trump's also talked about, we want to bring a lot of industry back to the US, feeling like other countries are maybe taking advantage of us, or he felt that we were relying too much on other countries for the goods and services that we utilize. So all that to be said, I don't know the exact day. It must have been yesterday or the day before. They actually paused the tariffs for 30 days on Canada and Mexico. Even before pausing, there was conversation by Canada and Mexico's side of like, okay, well, if the US is putting tariffs on us, we're going to put tariffs back on them. Like, that's where this conversation of trade war came in. So the day after, I think so Monday in this case, so price for Bitcoin comes back up, and I think a lot of other assets did because these tariffs were paused for 30 days. I remember seeing Mexico agreed to send 10,000 of like their border patrol agents to the border. So just seeing how quickly that bargaining chip resulted, in theory, what Trump wanted. So yeah, like as of now, there's 30 days for discussions to happen between the Canada, Mexico, and US governments. I don't think there's a delay on the Chinese ones at the moment. But yeah, that's kind of like state of the world when it comes to tariffs at the moment.
Yeah. And then I don't know if we want to get into it now, but then when I started to first hear about this, first when I saw Bitcoin's price react negatively to tariffs, I'm like, whoa, what the hell's going on here? And then, you see the news about tariffs and, the countries that, you know, Mexico, Canada, China. And I was just curious myself. I'm like, okay, well, it goes without saying with China, just everywhere you look, everything's made in China. So you can already understand the impact that these tariffs could have on goods coming from China. But I just had to think to myself too. I'm like, all right, what goods are coming from Mexico and Canada that we rely on? Because I've never had any idea really, other than simple things like, all right, like for Mexico, you have like Mexican beers such as what is it, Modelo, Corona,
I mean, tequila, that was
right,
one that like the US can't produce, I think, at scale. So price of that would have gone up a ton.
right,
Canada, it's like a lot of energy exports that they provide
yeah,
to us.
yeah, and that was really interesting to read about like other things that we rely on Mexico for. We rely on Mexico for a lot of automobile type things, like literal cars itself, but parts for cars, and obviously a lot of produce. Avocados. Your price of avocados will go up. Um, you know, bell peppers, berries, like a lot comes from Mexico, and if these tariffs do in fact get enacted, I guess you could say, you can imagine that those prices are going to go up, and that's how it'll affect the daily lives of us that you'll see at the grocery store. And for Canada, like you said, I think they import crude oil, so you could see gasoline prices go up because of the fact that we've imposed this 25. Well, actually, I'm mistaken. I think I actually read that for the gasoline itself, that wouldn't be 25%. That would be a little less, but everything else would be 25%. But
Yep.
either way, if those tariffs do in fact get enacted, you can imagine that your price for gas will go up and paper goods. And it kind of goes into, it made me realize like, wow, we rely on, and this is maybe just me being ignorant and not paying attention in any of my history classes or just just paying attention to world news. Like I've always been a sports guy, so I've just haven't given a shit about anything other than
You're like,
sports.
how
So I
does
don't.
this raise Knicks ticket prices?
Yeah, exactly. Like I've never cared to learn or know about politics truthfully, just because I didn't care for it. But now that I have in this world of Bitcoin, it's certainly gotten me wanting to learn more. And I'm probably like 5 years behind where I should be, or 10 years behind. I probably should have learned this like in high school, but here we
Well,
are.
we've talked about it. It's not till you like make your own money and pay taxes and all this that it's like, okay, all of these decisions are impacting my life in some way. So I should probably be at least a little educated on what's going on, just so like I can at worst have an opinion, right? Like be able to say I agree with this or I don't agree with this. That's where like voting comes in. Obviously, we didn't really have a say in whether, I guess we did in the presidential election. He talked about tariffs for a long time. So you have a say there. So we're just trying to simplify this. And that's this next part that I want to get into is like, how do tariffs work? Because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding out there. I didn't know about this either before doing the research, and it was funny, like not to throw you under the bus, but we were debriefing on like the episode notes yesterday, and I feel like you still didn't like fully understand who was paying the tariff until we like ran through it, and you're like, okay, I'm glad we talked about this before I said something to
Yeah,
confuse people on the
so
podcast.
no, I'm glad you brought that up. Full disclosure, I thought when I was reading about tariffs, shout out Grok and ChatGPT and some other articles that I read, but I was under the impression that it was the countries that were importing these goods to us that were going to be paying the essentially the tax.
Well, and that's how it
Um,
sounds, right? We're tariffing China, we're tariffing Canada, we're tariffing Mexico. I sent you an Instagram reel that was like roommates. It was like making a joke of it. It's like, bro, did you put a tariff on me? Yeah, you
yeah,
didn't do your dishes. Well, I'm putting a tariff on you because you never do grocery shopping. And
right.
we had just debriefed on this episode. And I'm like, these guys don't know how tariffs work, but that's what we're here for, to help.
So just to make it very clear, yeah, the countries that are importing the goods do not pay that tax essentially.
Yeah, I can get into now like how that works. So yeah, that's true. Tariffs are paid by the importers. So those are the people or the businesses in the country that is receiving the good. So in the case of the United States, we just wanted to like give a quick, simple example. For example, Walmart being a US based company, let's say they're buying TVs from China, and that's like they buy a ton of volume from China. That's like their main provider for TVs, which honestly wouldn't surprise me. This is just a random example though. With a tariff, they're now going to have to pay 25% more to buy those TVs from China. That money's being paid to the US government. I think it's Border Patrol collects that money, and I think it somehow ends up in the Treasury at some point. So because of that, Walmart has one of three decisions to make. The first one is that they just continue to buy these TVs from their Chinese providers at a 25% higher price. And then they choose to sell those TVs to US consumers at the same price. So you as a consumer wouldn't pay more in this instance. But what's happening then is since Walmart's paying more and charging the same amount, their profit margin diminishes. I think in world scenario, that's very likely not to happen. I think option two, where let's say they continue to buy those TVs at 25% higher price, they then sell those TVs to US consumers at least a 25% higher price to maintain profit margin is more likely to happen. So this tariff that Evan was saying, yeah, China pays this, in reality is trickling all the way down to you as the US consumer to pay that tax at the end of the day. How China's hurt in that scenario, well, I guess China actually isn't hurt at all in those two because Walmart's still buying from them. The
Right.
third
Well,
scenario, or go ahead. Yeah.
no. So just to clarify, so the first, it's either Walmart's eating the cost and saying, you know what, we'll still sell the TVs at the same price. We'll just take the L on this.
Mm-hmm.
Option two is that they're like, we're not taking the L here. We want to boost those profits. We want our shareholders to be happy. We need to continue to make money. We're going to pass down the added cost to our consumers. So you're going to have to pay a little bit more for those TVs because now we got to pay a little more to get them.
And again, wouldn't you say that's the second option to maintain their profit is probably what most businesses are going to do?
Most likely. Yeah, I would probably assume so. But yeah. And then what's option three there?
Yeah, so option three is that Walmart decides the TVs are too expensive because it is eating into their profit margin so much, and they decide to stop buying TVs from China in general. That can go a couple different ways from there. Basically, Walmart has to choose a different distributor so that, like, as a business, they're probably going to still choose the cheapest option, which probably means like a country like Cambodia or another cheap producing country like that. I think what a lot of Americans are hoping for and what Trump has alluded to is in those situations, we're not buying from China as much because these tariffs are in place. So it's more expensive for the importer. And they would like to bring production of TVs in this example back to the United States. And that Walmart is buying US produced televisions or again, whatever else the product is, and paying American workers for that, since those factories would then be hiring Americans in theory. I don't know how likely that is, to be honest. Like, I think pie in the sky world, yeah, that's awesome. Like, wages go up, like, everything's produced locally. I think there's difficulties in that. Like, you touched on it, Evan. We rely a lot on other countries. I think that's a result of living in a globalized modern day economy. I don't think it's as easy in the modern era to solely produce everything in house. Like, I think there are things that straight up we're not able to make here. So I don't know. Like, I guess tariffs in theory make sense for certain things, but I think the execution it leaves a lot up to chance unless you really have like the I's dotted and the T's crossed before you're implementing them.
Right. So I guess to kind of go over it again, and honestly, this is more for my own sake. So I want to make sure I'm understanding it 100%. So the hope with tariffs, the good that could potentially come out of it is, so the money that is made from these tariffs essentially will end up with the US Treasury. From there, that money can be used for various things, like I think I read up on it was like military operations, social programs, trying to offset the budget deficit, things of that nature. That's the hope that enough, like we make enough money from these tariffs being implemented that it can go towards those items. In addition, the hope is that, like you said, we can start producing more of these goods, services, whatever, out of America. Um, which will then lead to more jobs and just more production out of the U.S., which um, you know will help the American people. That's the hope, is that that will happen. And then I guess, long story short, that tariffs can potentially help the country financially. Bigger picture, that's the hope. But
Yeah,
what's the down? I guess what's the you mentioned that the downside is the fact that the consumer in the long run may get screwed because of these higher prices. A lot of these corporations are just like, yeah, no, like we're not just gonna like
right.
we're not gonna lose profit margin here.
In our notes here, just as a summary, and I think you hit all of the nails on the head, but just like really crisp it up. Arguments for and against Trump tariffs. For is that the tariffs protect U.S. industries, create jobs, and reduce reliance on foreign goods. They generate revenue and give the U.S. leverage for fairer trade deals. On the against side, you have that tariffs are a hidden tax on Americans, raising prices and fueling inflation. They hurt businesses, trigger retaliation from other countries, and create economic uncertainty. So I don't know what's going to happen. Like, to me, it feels like, especially with this 30-day delay, that more than anything, it was a bargaining chip related to illegal immigration, since that's such a big focus of Trump's campaign. But I do think there's truth that he in theory thinks they will help boost American industry. We talked about it yesterday. I think there's other layers that need to be added on to than just tariffs to do that. Things like you need to incentivize businesses that have moved their production outside of the US due to costs. You need to incentivize them to come back. That's likely tax breaks if you're producing in America. I know we don't like crypto and view Bitcoin as separate from crypto, but I think there was conversation about crypto produced in the US or businesses that operate crypto companies in the US specifically would not be subject to capital gains tax or some level of taxing, things like that. I think the fact that they're looking at that for crypto tells me they would consider that for other goods and services. But even if they do that again, I think there are things that we just don't produce here. I think, and I don't know this that well, silicon for computer chips, I think is one that we just like don't produce. Like we don't have any natural reserves of that. I think a lot of that is produced in Taiwan, and that's why like Taiwan is such a geopolitical hotspot. And again, silicon chips are in everything, right? Like NVIDIA's using it to produce everything related to AI. Your iPhone has it. So I don't know. I'm, again, not a tariff expert. We don't want to get too in the weeds on it. I think this is a good primer on like, we'll see what happens. Here's at least why this could be happening and like what behind the curtain looks like a little bit. But I think it gets even more complicated than what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is obviously very surface level, and there's still a ton for us to even learn about it. But something I thought was interesting that I was reading about when I was trying to learn about tariffs here is, I don't think this is going to happen, but there's been talks of, okay, if these tariffs are imposed and we end up bringing in a ton of revenue into America, is that they had talks, or they would talk about getting rid of federal income tax, and essentially the revenue that would come in from tariffs would take the place of taxing American citizens. And do I think that's going to happen? Highly unlikely, but that would be pretty awesome. I'm not going to lie. If that meant that more money, every paycheck can go into people's pockets, that would be awesome. But I
Yeah,
don't
but
know.
I want to pose this too, like, and who knows what this looks like. Let's say they cut income tax because tariffs are in theory funding all of that. What are income tax rates? Like 20-ish%? Let's just use that as like a round number. If tariffs result in you as the consumer paying 25% more than you're actually better off just paying the income tax versus the tariff.
Yeah, well, if that is the case, yeah, but and I guess that's all marketing slash politics there, where it's like, see,
Yeah.
we got rid of federal income. Yeah, I mean,
Well, and some of this I think you just don't know until it happens.
mhm.
Yeah, that's again, we're not the experts. I hope people who are experts are being listened to, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think the hope for everybody is the fact that I think that these tariffs, it's almost like it also could just suck short term and like no one really knows, which is why there's this it seems like why there's this market uncertainty of like we don't know what's going to happen here, and that's why some people are trying to get liquid and get cash because
Yeah, no, and that's the perfect segue into how does this tie back into Bitcoin, which is ultimately what we care about. And we think in the long run, just plain and simple, this doesn't really matter for Bitcoin. Like we had a good conversation about this, that this is just another fiat game. And when I say fiat games, it's just government using tools at their disposal, using money, the dollar specifically in this case, as a weapon to benefit like itself and ideally its citizens, but not always. So it just seems like too much power for a single entity to have. Like government specifically is extremely powerful. Like the dollar truly is a weapon in that it can weaponize it against pretty much any adversary by restricting access to the dollar if they deem whatever adversary isn't doing something they like. We're seeing it here with using it as a bargaining chip for all these countries. So the reason we say this doesn't really affect Bitcoin is in the long run, government's still going to have to print money to finance its debt. There's no other option. If they don't do that, they'll likely eventually default on their debt because it's growing too much. Literally, the only way they could get out of that is by either taxing us way more, maybe tariffing us a ton, but it'd be so much that like we would totally feel the burden of that. And like people would be pissed and in the streets because so much of their money is being taken from them. Or you take austerity measures where it's like literally rationing food and energy and things like that, which people are also going to be pissed by. So
it's pretty
it's in,
extreme though, right?
well, no, that's like really it. It's like they either inflate the money, they implement austerity measures to try to lower the debt because the government spends so much, or they tax the crap out of you to try to pay off government debt. So yeah, like the first two sound extreme, but they're real options that because they're so extreme and would get such negative response, the government's not willing to do. So that leaves inflating the currency as their only path. So point being, if they're going to choose inflation, which is the path of least resistance, this doesn't change that at all. Money's still going to be printed in the long run regardless. So I think you had some good thoughts on this as well, as like, regardless of these like fiat fluctuations and games that are being played, Bitcoin is still the best way to save your wealth over time for a myriad of reasons. So I'll let you get into that.
Yeah. It's probably I wrote down a lot of these thoughts because sometimes when I get fired up, I can't even get a thought out because I'm just ready to go. So I'm just gonna
You got
read.
to throw this on Twitter, write a thread out.
Yeah, that's probably best. But just to sum up why, like basically why these tariffs have affected Bitcoin's price. Obviously, we went through it, but tariffs create a lot of uncertainty, which investors do not like, which is why Bitcoin has been volatile the past week or so. Bitcoin is the most liquid in terms of cryptocurrencies, and it can be traded 24/7. The tariffs we said went into effect on February 1st, and then on Sunday, uh, basically there's just been a ton of price volatility. The stock market isn't open on the weekends. And what is open on the weekend? Well, Bitcoin. And with Bitcoin being the most liquid and widely owned, that's where people express their sentiment on the market. Instead of waiting for Monday morning for the stock market to open, they say, you know what? I don't like what I'm hearing with these tariffs. Bitcoin's very liquid. I'm going to sell my Bitcoin, get some cash for this right now. And then I'll wait for the market to open on Monday and I'll do my thing there. And so,
Well, and you've
yeah,
touched on it. Like, I think the point in all of that is there's a misunderstanding about Bitcoin generally. It's viewed as a risk on, very risky asset that because it is so volatile, people are scared of it crashing. I mean, it has crashed, right? But there's like cycles to that people don't understand to like why it would crash or not. So that's what we're going to continue to try to educate on, is why is this one of the least risky things you can do in the long run, for like the principles of it and why it's sound money and all these other reasons, so that you can be confident when these scary situations come up and price does go down, you're confident in the foundation of like why you bought this and won't sell, because that's just going to hurt you in the long run.
Right. What you realize is that, the people that are trading this aren't in this for the long haul. If they were, they would understand what they're owning and they wouldn't be selling it. But they see it as just something that, and by they I mean, traders are seeing this as just something that's incredibly liquid and an opportunity to either get cash or also make money. There's instruments where when something goes down, you can actually make money on. And, that's for sophisticated investors and quite frankly, way more sophisticated than I am as an investor. But that's what they care about. But in the long haul, I would say the majority of people that hold Bitcoin are understand what they own. And this price volatility is nothing, because it actually, I said it to you, David, it makes no sense why. I was trying to think about it today in terms of an analogy. And the best thing I could think of was like, you've got these two sandboxes, right? Sandbox one, you've got kids playing in sandbox one, and there's just like complete chaos there. They're yelling, they're screaming, they're hitting each other, whatever. And then you got sandbox two, and sandbox two is super peaceful. The kids are just like, playing nice, very, very kind to one another. And let's just say the teachers, the chaperones, whatever, come up to sandbox one to the chaotic kids, and they're like, hey, knock it off. And then those same chaperones or teachers, whatever, go to the second sandbox and they say to the calm kids, hey, knock it off. And the calm kids are like, what? Like, what are we doing? Like, why are we tied into them? We weren't making any noise here. And I view that very much of like what's going on with the stock market and these other markets and Bitcoin. It's like, unfortunately, right now, Bitcoin is tied to the traditional market, but I believe that and I think at some point down the line, it could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that it won't be. Like, people are going to realize what this asset is, and it won't trade it won't move like the stock market does. And yeah, I think that Bitcoin just gets treated unfairly during this. And I think all Bitcoiners, when they see this, they lick their lips and they're salivating because they're like, a price drop for this? Yeah, okay, I'll buy more.
It's
Um,
literally a sale to
right.
us, like from our perspective, because I can get more Bitcoin for what I view as a crappy US dollar than I was able to get a week ago. So it really is a discount. No, that analogy is funny. I was like waiting for it to come full circle, and it did. And then also in terms of like you talked about traders and like these people who want to sell it off, the smartest money managers in the world are buying Bitcoin and not selling Bitcoin. BlackRock and $1 trillion under asset management, MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor. I think
Strategy
they
now.
own, or yeah,
Just
they're just
strategy
strategy.
now.
Is it just
As a,
strategy Bitcoin, or it just has the B logo now?
I think strategy to like when you're just in conversation, but strategy B if you see the logo.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Strategy, rebranded today, owns more Bitcoin than any government in the world. And he's not CEO anymore, like whatever he is, chairman,
Yeah.
has said they're never selling and that he's going to die with his Bitcoin as a benefit to everybody else because there will be less supply in the market. So point being there, like this is like a rude way of putting it, but it's like common phrase, like dumb money is selling, smart money is not. And that's been the cycle over time in terms of like wealth transferring from normal people to these like rich investors who like really understand money. So not calling you dumb by any means. That's like what we're trying to educate on, is like the whole purpose of this podcast is we want retail, normal people who are looking to save their time and energy to have a path to do that. And we think you can still get good bang for your buck right now with buying Bitcoin as it is priced at $97,000. Like, it sounds like a ton of money, and it is, but like the spending power of what you could get for that in the future could far exceed what 97,000 US dollars is today. We don't know that for sure, but that's historically what's been happening is $5 spent on Bitcoin in 2009 to buy a single Bitcoin is now worth almost 100,000 today. So that's been, yeah.
Sorry, don't mean to cut you off, but it's just so funny even talking about this. I remember when, it was probably like 6 to 8 months ago, Bitcoin was trading at like somewhere between the range of the mid 50s to high 60s. And if at the time, and I'm still very like new to Bitcoin, but I remember it would reach 69, 68. I'm like, kind of want to wait for it to touch like 62, 63. And if it does, I'm going to buy. And I got lucky once or twice where it did drop that low, but then all of a sudden price just got away from me and it hit 107 or whatever it did. And now I'm sitting here saying if it touched 68, 69K, I would be
Back up the Brinks truck.
yeah. I, that seems to be the history of Bitcoin is that, everyone has the same thought process of, okay, like, and that's where Michael Saylor, who you brought up, he says, I'm buying the top forever because he always compares it to like New York real estate. He said, if you bought New York real estate 40 years ago, people would say, wow, you're buying, that's expensive. Guess what? Guess how many people would have been jumped on that price now today? Because just what he's saying is purchasing power is going down, but good assets are going to continue to go up. Hard
Well, the
assets.
reason for that is money will be printed forever for the reasons that I was saying, that the government has to inflate the money to pay down their debt. Or like, yeah, that's like the only way they can do this. So they will forever print money. And what that money goes into most of the time is assets. So any asset you buy will do well relative to the dollar, whether that's real estate, stocks, just like Bitcoin has proven to perform the best because of its limited supply. It's the most scarce asset that exists, maybe most scarce thing in the world. Like I actually can't think of anything other than time as the example people give. The only thing you have less of than Bitcoin is time on earth. So yeah, like Bitcoin basically just absorbs all of this money that's being printed. And I think as more and more people realize what this is and the value it has, you'll even see money come out of these other asset pools, again, real estate, stocks, whatever, to save in something that's safer and the better long-term savings vehicle in Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yeah. I think what we're going to see the next few months, probably, if not longer, is you're just going to see a lot of volatility, truthfully. I think while these tariffs are still lingering, it's going to be a roller coaster where price is going to drop a bit. It's going to go up a bit. It's all noise at the end of the day. If, it's long
And
term,
be
like
sure to, sorry, I was going to say, make sure you have a long time horizon. Like if you're listening to us and you're like, okay, I think I maybe want to dip my toe in. My recommendation without making this financial advice is like, you need to
not
think,
financial advice, not financial advice.
yeah, not financial advice. Um, you have to look in at least like 4-year periods. Like you can't say, I need to go pay rent later this month and I have $1,000 for rent. I'm going to put that into Bitcoin and make more, because then there's probably a good chance you're not going to make rent because Bitcoin went down for whatever reason that spooked the market and you're not able to make rent over a long enough period of time. And like, again, the data shows this and we'll do more content on it. That's not the case. So it really forces you to think about things long term. Do I want to spend $5,000 on, I don't know, a new car or a used car today that I don't need? Or do I want to put that money into Bitcoin where that could be worth 10, 20, 30, who knows how many thousands of dollars if I wait that 4 years? So it's exciting times. Like I think that's really how we feel, is there's a lot of opportunity here for normal people. Like it's not very often that normal people can get benefits from like assets in this way. And we just want to help spread the word and get people interested and educated on it.
Well said. Well, I think that's all we have, and hopefully you learned a thing or two about tariffs, or at least it made you want to look up a thing or two about it, because prior to Bitcoin, like I said, I could give two shits about anything economics related, anything, but it's good to be informed. It's good to know what's going on and not be an idiot like me, where I'm like don't understand.
Hey, give yourself some credit.
But yeah, no, it's important to know what's going on, and hopefully you learned a thing or two. But you
Yeah,
listened, we appreciate.
yeah, I was going to
Oh,
say, no, thanks for listening. It's not about Bitcoin. We are expanding our content reach. So we're now on TikTok, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. So depending on how you hear this, if you're on one of the streaming channels, we'll include our link tree in there so you can follow us on social media. We'll be like chopping this content up and even adding like other content on TikTok and Reels that we hope really like drives the message home. So feel free to follow us, engage with us on there. We're on there posting and engaging with other Bitcoin creators as much as possible. So if we see a message from somebody who listened, definitely be more than happy to have a conversation and go back and forth. Again, appreciate the support if you are listening, and hopefully we can work together to make everyone's lives better.
that was just a really respectful way of avoiding the corny like, subscribe,
Yeah,
whatever the other things, like, subscribe,
I know
follow.
we're too new at this to even know the right way to do it. So yeah, there's my polite version until I'm up to speed on just like knocking it out quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Cool.
yeah, appreciate everyone listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.